At my retirement party, my daughter-in-law put poison in my drink, so I switched glasses with her mother. I know how that sounds. Like something from a movie or a twisted novel you'd read on a plane. But I'm standing here in my kitchen in Dearborn, Michigan, watching the sun come up over my backyard, and that's exactly what happened 3 months ago. My name is Miriam. I'm 68 years old. I wear a hijab every single day, and I just sent my only son to prison for trying to kill me. This isn't a story about revenge. It's about survival, about what happens when the people you die for decide you're worth more dead than alive, about discovering that sometimes the strongest weapon you have is the thing others mistake for weakness. I built a consulting firm from nothing, sold it for $35 million, raised a son by myself after my husband died of cancer. I thought I'd earned my peace. I was wrong. The truth is, I almost didn't see it coming. Almost let them win. But something my late husband used to say kept echoing in my mind during those final weeks. The quietest people are often the ones who notice everything. And I noticed. God help me, I noticed everything. This is going to be a long story. There are parts that still make my hands shake when I think about them. Moments where I questioned everything I believed about family, about trust, about the very foundation of who I am. But if you want to understand how a 68-year-old woman in a headscarf outsmarted her own son and his wife, how I turned their plan against them and walked away with my life and my dignity intact, then stay with me. I'll need a friend to get through this telling. To make sure you hear how it ends, you can follow along here. That way, you won't miss what happens next. Because what happened next changed everything. 6 months before that party, I thought I had everything figured out. I'd wake up at 5:30 every morning, same as I'd done for 40 years. The house would be quiet, just the sound of birds starting to sing outside my bedroom window. I'd wash for prayer, then kneel on my prayer rug facing east, toward Mecca. Those moments were mine, sacred, untouchable. After prayer, I'd make Turkish coffee in the copper pot my mother gave me when I got married. The smell of cardamom would fill my kitchen. I'd sit at my table, the one my husband and I bought at an estate sale when we first moved to this Victorian house, and I'd plan my day. Back then, my days were full of meetings about the company sale. Lawyers, accountants, corporate consultants. The business I'd started in a garage in 1988 was being purchased by an international consortium. $35 million. The number still made me dizzy. My son Kareem would visit every Sunday for dinner. He'd bring Natalie and their daughter, my granddaughter, Layla. We'd eat lamb biryani or chicken shawarma, and Layla would run around my backyard chasing butterflies while the adults talked. Except the adults weren't really talking. Not about anything real. I started noticing it around March. Small things. Kareem would get tense whenever I mentioned my estate planning. Natalie would lean forward, her eyes sharp, whenever the lawyers called during Sunday dinner. Once, I caught her listening outside my study door when I was on the phone with my financial advisor. When I opened the door, she jumped back, laughed it off, said she was just checking if I wanted more tea. But her face had been pressed against the wood. I'd seen the indent on her cheek when she pulled away. Then came the letter. I'd gone to Kareem's townhouse in Ann Arbor to drop off some of Layla's toys she'd left at my house. He and Natalie were both out. He'd told me they'd be at a work event. I had a key. I let myself in. The house was a mess. Dishes piled in the sink. Mail scattered across the dining table. Bills, mostly. Red stamped final notices. I started gathering them up, thinking I'd organize them as a favor, maybe quietly pay a few like I'd done before. That's when I saw it. A business card, paper-clipped to a document, tucked inside a book on estate planning. The card read, Morrison and Associates, Elder Law Specialists, Conservatorships, Competency Hearings. My hands went cold. I opened the document. It was a consultation summary, 3 pages detailing the process of having someone declared mentally incompetent, the timeline for filing, the evidence needed, the role of psychiatric evaluation. There were handwritten notes in the margins. Kareem's handwriting. I'd know it anywhere. I'd helped him practice his letters when he was 6 years old. Need 2 doctors. Pemberton already on board. File after sale closes. Power of attorney immediate. I stood in his dining room holding that paper and felt something crack inside my chest. Not my heart. Hearts are soft things that break clean. This was something harder. Something that had been holding me together for decades. The foundation of trust. I took photos of every page with my phone, put everything back exactly as I'd found it, drove home in complete silence. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my kitchen with cold coffee, staring at those photos on my phone, trying to find another explanation. Any explanation. Maybe it was research for a friend. Maybe Kareem was helping a colleague. Maybe I was jumping to conclusions. But I kept seeing those words in his handwriting. File after sale closes. After I had $35 million in my accounts. After I was worth killing, or worse, worth erasing. The next morning, I called Sarah Chen. Sarah Chen had worked with me before, back when I was vetting potential business partners. Small woman, maybe 5'2", with gray-streaked black hair she wore in a practical bun. She looked like someone's grandmother. That was her greatest asset. We met at a cafe in downtown Detroit. I brought the photos on my phone, showed her everything. She studied them for a long time without speaking. Finally, she looked up at me, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Pity. That's when I knew it was real. She told me she'd need 2 weeks, maybe 3. She'd follow Kareem and Natalie, check their financial records, see what was really going on. She warned me the truth might be worse than I imagined. I told her I didn't care. I needed to know. Those 3 weeks were the longest of my life. I kept up appearances. Sunday dinners continued. I smiled at Natalie's backhanded compliments about my traditional cooking. I hugged Kareem when he left. I played with Layla, reading her stories about brave princesses who saved themselves, all while watching them like a hawk watches a snake. I noticed things I'd been blind to before. How Kareem's eyes were always bloodshot. How he and Natalie would exchange glances when I mentioned traveling after retirement. How Natalie would steer every conversation toward my health, asking if I was sleeping well, if I'd been forgetting things, if I'd considered slowing down. She was building a narrative, right in front of me. Sarah called me on a Tuesday afternoon. Her voice was tight. She told me to come to her office, alone. Don't tell anyone. I drove there with my heart pounding so hard I thought I might actually have the heart attack they were planning to fake. Sarah's office was above a dry cleaner in a strip mall. The stairs creaked. The hallway smelled like chemicals and old carpet. Her door had frosted glass with her name stenciled in simple black letters. Inside, she had a conference table covered with folders. Photographs, bank statements, printouts of text messages. She told me to sit down. What she showed me made that letter at Kareem's house look like a love note. My son was drowning, gambling debts. Started small, she said, maybe 5 years ago. Online poker, then sports betting. Then he'd discovered a casino in Detroit that ran high-stakes games. Natalie joined him. They'd go together. Sometimes 3 nights a week. They'd lost everything. Refinanced their townhouse twice. Maxed out credit cards. Taken personal loans. Then they'd gone to loan sharks. Sarah pushed a photograph across the table. Kareem sitting in a parking garage with a man whose face was half in shadow. The man's hand was on Kareem's shoulder. Not friendly, threatening. She told me they owed $350,000. The interest was 20%, monthly. The loan sharks had given them until November to pay, or there would be consequences. I felt sick, but there was more. Sarah showed me text messages she'd recovered from Natalie's phone. They'd been planning this for 9 months. Since January, right after I'd first mentioned selling the company. They'd researched conservatorship laws, found Dr. Marcus Pemberton, a psychiatrist who'd been disciplined twice by the medical board for questionable competency evaluations. Pemberton had agreed to evaluate me. Declare me mentally incompetent. For $15,000 cash. The plan was simple. Get power of attorney. Move me into a luxury nursing facility, drain my accounts to pay their debts, and keep the rest. But there was a backup plan. Sarah pulled out another document, a pharmacy receipt. Natalie had purchased something from a contact at a pharmaceutical lab where she'd worked briefly 5 years ago, modified strychnine mixed with digoxin. Sarah explained what that meant. A poison that mimics a heart attack in elderly people. Hard to detect without specific testing. By the time anyone thought to look, it would be too late. I sat there staring at that receipt, at my daughter-in-law's signature. Sarah's voice seemed to come from far away. She was saying something about going to the police, about getting protection. But I wasn't listening. I was thinking about the retirement party I'd been planning. The one scheduled for 3 weeks from now. The one where I'd invited over 100 people to celebrate selling the company. The one where Natalie would have access to my house, my kitchen, my drinks. I looked up at Sarah. I told her I wasn't going to the police. Not yet. I told her I needed her to do something else instead. The night of the party, I dressed with extra care. I chose my cream-colored hijab, the silk one with tiny gold threads woven through the fabric. It had been a gift from my husband on our 20th anniversary. He'd brought it back from Damascus, from a shop near the Umayyad Mosque. I pinned it carefully, making sure every fold was perfect. In the mirror, I looked exactly like what they thought I was. A traditional Muslim woman, modest, quiet, harmless, perfect target. I'd spent the previous 3 weeks preparing. Sarah had installed security cameras throughout my house. Tiny things, hidden in picture frames, in the corners of crown molding, tucked into the outdoor lamp fixtures. Professional grade. They'd capture everything in high definition. I'd also had a conversation with my lawyer about changing my will. Created an irrevocable trust. Most of my estate would go to charity. Layla would get an educational fund, managed by a trustee. Karim and Natalie would get the legal minimum. The documents were already signed, already filed, but they didn't know that yet. The caterers arrived at 4. They set up tables in my backyard, under the oak trees that had been there longer than I'd owned the house. White tablecloths, string lights, flowers everywhere, roses and jasmine, the flowers from my wedding. Guests started arriving at 5:30. Business associates I'd worked with for decades. Neighbors who'd watched me transform from a struggling immigrant into a successful entrepreneur. People who respected me, who knew my story. I greeted everyone at the door, smiled, accepted congratulations, hugged old friends, all while watching the driveway for Karim's car. They arrived at 6:15. Natalie wore a tight burgundy dress that looked expensive, probably bought with money from their 3rd refinance. Karim wore a suit that didn't quite fit right anymore. He'd lost weight from stress. Layla ran to me immediately. She was wearing a yellow dress, her dark hair in pigtails. She threw her arms around my waist. I held her tight, breathed in the smell of her strawberry shampoo, thought about what her parents were planning to do, what they were willing to sacrifice for money. Natalie kissed my cheek. Her perfume was overpowering. Some designer brand that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. She told me I looked beautiful, that this was such a wonderful celebration, that she was so proud of me. Every word was a knife. I showed them to the backyard. The party was in full swing now. The string quartet I'd hired was playing Vivaldi. People were laughing, drinking, helping themselves to the buffet of lamb biryani and grilled kebabs. I'd set up a refreshment table near the porch, water, sodas, sparkling cider, and one specific glass, my crystal glass with the gold rim, the one from Damascus. Everyone in the family knew it was mine. I'd left it in its usual spot, right where Natalie would expect it to be. I mingled for the next hour, talked about the company sale, about my retirement plans, about traveling, maybe visiting family in Lebanon. Normal conversation, easy and comfortable. But I was counting down. At 7:30, the sun started to set. The hired photographer was taking group photos near the cake. Everyone was gathering, distracted. That's when Natalie made her move. I was standing in the hallway between the kitchen and the back porch, pretending to adjust my hijab in the antique mirror with the gilded frame. But really, I was watching the reflection of the refreshment table. Natalie appeared, looked around, checked that everyone was focused on the photos. Then she reached into her clutch. My heart stopped. She pulled out a small vial, no bigger than her thumb, glass, clear liquid inside. She unscrewed the cap with practiced ease, poured it into my gold-rimmed glass. The whole thing took maybe 10 seconds. Smooth, professional, like she'd practiced. She tucked the vial back into her clutch, smoothed her dress, turned, and saw me in the mirror. For just a second, panic flashed across her face, raw and undeniable. Then she smiled. She walked over, holding the poisoned glass like an offering. Her voice was honey-sweet when she spoke. She told me I'd worked so hard all my life that I deserved to relax and enjoy my party. She held out the glass. I took it, felt the cold crystal against my palm, looked at the sparkling cider inside, my favorite drink at celebrations. You'd never know it was poisoned just by looking. I thanked her, called her sweet, told her I just needed to check on something in the kitchen first. She smiled wider, told me not to take too long. I walked into the kitchen. My hands weren't shaking. I felt strangely calm, like I was watching myself from outside my body. This was it, the moment I'd been preparing for. I could dump the poison down the sink, confront them right here, right now. But then they'd deny everything, claim I was paranoid, senile. They'd push harder for the competency hearing. I needed more. I needed witnesses to what this poison could do. That's when I saw Helen, Natalie's mother, 62 years old, frail. A sweet woman who'd always been kind to me, who'd apologized privately for her daughter's rudeness more than once. She was standing near the buffet table, looking confused, searching for something to drink. I felt my stomach clench with guilt, but I thought about Kareem's texts, about the loan sharks, about 9 months of planning my death, about Layla growing up with parents who were willing to murder for money. Sometimes justice requires terrible choices. I walked over to Helen, started chatting about the weather, about how beautiful the party was. She agreed, smiling that gentle smile. When she bent down to pick up her purse, I switched the glasses. Fast, smooth. No one saw. I walked away with her glass of plain sparkling water. Left my gold-rimmed crystal glass, now filled with poison, sitting where Helen would find it. 10 minutes later, I was talking to my former business partner about the good old days when the screaming started. Helen hit the brick patio like a dropped stone. 1 second she was standing by the buffet table, the next her legs just gave out. Her body started convulsing before she even fully hit the ground, violent, rhythmic spasms that made her skull crack against the brick. White foam poured from her mouth. Her eyes rolled back. Someone screamed. Then everyone was screaming. People ran toward her. The photographer dropped his camera. The string quartet stopped playing mid-note. One of the caterers, a young woman maybe 25, started crying. Someone yelled to call 911. 3 different people pulled out their phones. But I wasn't looking at Helen. I was watching my son. Kareem stood frozen near the water fountain, not moving toward his mother-in-law, not running to help, just standing there with his face the color of old paper, staring at Natalie. And Natalie was staring at the ground, at the shattered crystal glass lying in pieces next to Helen's convulsing body, the gold rim glinting in the string lights. My glass. In that moment, I saw everything on Natalie's face. Not concern for her mother, not shock at a sudden medical emergency. Just pure, absolute horror as she realized what had happened. The poison wasn't in the right person. Her mother was dying instead of me. I moved through the crowd slowly. No one was paying attention to me anymore. They were all focused on Helen, on the paramedics someone said were coming, on trying to figure out what was happening. I walked up to where Kareem and Natalie stood, close enough that only they could hear me. I kept my voice soft, almost a whisper. I told them what a terrible accident this was. How strange that Helen collapsed right next to the glass I always used. What an odd coincidence. Natalie's head snapped toward me. Her eyes were wild, terrified. Karim couldn't even look at me. His hands were shaking so badly he had to shove them in his pockets. I watched him carefully, searched his face for surprise, for confusion, for the reaction of someone witnessing an unexpected tragedy. I saw none of that. I saw guilt, recognition, the specific panic of someone who knows a plan has gone catastrophically wrong. He wasn't just his wife's passive observer. He'd known, had been part of it, every step. The paramedics arrived in 12 minutes. They loaded Helen onto a stretcher, still seizing. Her daughter, my daughter-in-law who'd just poisoned her, rode in the ambulance, crying hysterically. Karim tried to follow, but one of the paramedics told him there wasn't room. He stood in my driveway, watching the ambulance speed away, sirens wailing through the quiet Dearborn suburb. The party dissolved after that. People left in clusters, whispering, promising to check on me later, asking if I was okay. I told everyone I was fine, offered tea to those who stayed to help clean up, picked up pieces of the shattered gold-rimmed glass from my patio. Karim left without saying goodbye. By 8:30, my house was empty, just me and the catering staff finishing cleanup. I went to my bedroom, sat on the edge of my bed, took out my phone, called Sarah Chen. She answered on the first ring. I told her I needed the security footage immediately. I needed copies of everything the cameras had captured, and I needed the name of a toxicology lab that could run tests faster than the hospital. Her voice was tight when she responded. She told me she'd already anticipated this, that she'd been watching the camera feeds remotely, that she had everything. She asked me if I was okay. I told her I was. That was a lie. My hands were shaking now. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving me cold and hollow. I'd just watched a woman nearly die, a woman who'd been nothing but kind to me, and I'd been the one to hand her the poisoned glass. I knelt on my prayer rug, tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come. All I could see was Helen's body hitting the patio, the foam at her mouth, Natalie's face when she realized what had gone wrong, and Karim, my son, my baby boy who I'd raised alone after his father died, standing there with guilt written across every feature. I didn't sleep that night, just sat in my kitchen with cold coffee, waiting for news from the hospital. It came at 3 a.m. Helen had been stabilized. She was in an induced coma while they tried to purge the poison from her system. The doctors were running tests to identify the toxin. That's when I called Sarah again. I told her I needed those toxicology results before anyone else got them. I needed to know exactly what poison Natalie had used, and I needed leverage. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she told me she'd make some calls, that she had contacts at the hospital, that she could probably get the results in 48 hours. I thanked her, started to hang up. She stopped me, asked me one question. Was I sure I wanted to do this? Because once we started down this path, there was no going back. I looked around my kitchen, at the copper pot I used for Turkish coffee, at the photographs of my husband on the wall, at the crayon drawing Layla had made me last week, stuck to my refrigerator with a magnet. I told Sarah I'd never been more sure of anything in my life. The next 2 days were the hardest test of faith I'd ever faced. Sarah delivered the second envelope on Thursday afternoon. She came to my house, wouldn't meet my eyes as she handed it over. The manila envelope was thick, heavy. She told me what was inside would break my heart, that she was sorry. I already knew that, had known since I found that first letter at Karim's house. I waited until she left before opening it. Inside were bank statements going back 2 years, highlighted sections showing cash withdrawals, thousands of dollars at a time, always on Friday nights, always from ATMs near the Detroit casino. There were photographs, time-stamped, Karim and Natalie entering the casino at midnight, leaving at 4 in the morning, sometimes 3 times a week, for months. More bank statements, personal loans from predatory lenders, interest rates at 40% annually, late payment penalties, refinancing documents for their townhouse, then a second mortgage, then a third. The numbers added up to a nightmare. They owed $350,000 to the loan sharks alone, plus another $100,000 in credit card debt, plus mortgages, plus car payments on vehicles they couldn't afford. They were drowning, beyond rescue. My inheritance was their only life raft. But the worst part wasn't the debt. It was how long they'd been planning this. Sarah had recovered text messages from Natalie's phone, conversations going back to January, right after I first mentioned selling the company. Natalie had initiated contact with Dr. Marcus Pemberton on January 15th, 9 months ago. She'd asked about conservatorship procedures, about what evidence was needed to declare someone mentally incompetent. Pemberton had sent her a detailed plan, step by step, how to document concerning behaviors, how to get a second doctor to concur, how to file the emergency petition, how long the process would take, $15,000 cash. That was his fee. But there was a backup plan. In March, Natalie had contacted someone at Hartwell Pharmaceuticals, a lab technician named Derek Moss, who she'd worked with 5 years ago. The text messages were careful, coded. But Sarah had decoded them. Natalie had asked about compounds that could simulate a heart attack in elderly people, specifically something that would be hard to detect without targeted testing. Derek had sent her a formula, modified strychnine mixed with digoxin. He'd explained the dosage, the effects, the timeline. He'd charged her $25,000 for a single vial. She'd paid in cash. Sarah had the bank withdrawal records. The last document in the envelope made my blood run cold. It was a handwritten timeline. Natalie's handwriting, a checklist. January, contact Pemberton, research conservatorship. February, begin documenting M's memory issues. March, obtain backup solution, test dosage on. April, August, continue building case, make M dependent. September, finalize sale, prepare party. October, execute plan, either conservatorship or plan B. November, pay debts, keep rest. They'd been watching me for 9 months, documenting everything I said, twisting normal senior moments into evidence of dementia, building a false narrative of incompetence, and plan B was murder. I sat in my kitchen holding that timeline. My hands weren't shaking anymore. I felt cold, crystalline, like something inside me had frozen solid. These were my son's hands on this plan, his agreement, his willingness to let his mother die for money. I thought about every Sunday dinner, every hug, every time Kareem had called me Mom with that warm voice, every time I'd believed he loved me. All of it was a performance, a long con, 9 months of preparation to steal my life. I called Sarah back. I told her I needed her to dig deeper into Dr. Pemberton. I wanted to know if he'd done this before, if there were other families he'd helped destroy. She called me back 6 hours later. Pemberton had been disciplined by the medical board twice in the past 5 years, both times for questionable competency evaluations that resulted in conservatorships. Both times, the families of the patients had suspected fraud but couldn't prove it. One of those patients had died in a nursing home 6 months after being declared incompetent. Her son had drained her accounts and disappeared. Sarah had contacted the medical board, explained what she'd found. They were already building a case against Pemberton. If I was willing to provide evidence, they could offer him immunity in exchange for testimony. I told her to make it happen. That night, I organized everything, created a folder with copies of every document, the bank statements, the text messages, the photographs, the timeline. I wrote a detailed summary of what I'd observed at the party, how I'd seen Natalie pour something into my glass, how I'd switched the glasses, how Kareem's reaction proved he'd known about the poison. I documented everything with the precision I'd learned running a business for 35 years, every detail, every timestamp, every piece of evidence. Then I made copies, One set for my lawyer, one set for the police, one set locked in my safe deposit box. On Sunday, Helen woke from her coma. The doctors said she'd been lucky. The poison had nearly killed her, but they'd caught it in time. She'd have some memory issues, might need physical therapy, but she'd survive. When I visited her in the hospital, she didn't remember the party, didn't remember drinking from my glass. The doctor said that was normal with this kind of trauma. I held her hand, told her I was glad she was okay. She smiled weakly, said she didn't know what had happened, asked if it had been a stroke. I didn't tell her the truth. Some mercies are more important than justice. But Natalie knew. When she visited her mother's hospital room and saw me there, her face went white. She left without saying a word. That evening, I called Karim. I told him I needed to see him and Natalie. Tomorrow, at my house. We needed to discuss some important matters regarding my estate. His voice was strained when he agreed, said they'd be there at 2:00. I hung up, looked at the folder on my kitchen table, at the evidence that would destroy my son's life. And I didn't feel anything at all. I dressed in my black hijab, the one I'd bought in Istanbul during a business trip 12 years ago. Pure silk, no embroidery, no decoration. It was my veil of mourning. I wore it because even though my son was still alive, I was about to bury him. The version of him I'd carried in my heart. The child I'd raised. The man I thought I'd shaped. They arrived at exactly 2:00. Karim's car pulled into my driveway like a hearse. I watched from the window as they sat there for a moment. Saw Karim's mouth moving, probably rehearsing lies. Natalie kept checking her phone. Finally, they got out. Walked to my door like condemned prisoners. I let them in. Led them to my sitting room. The formal one I rarely used, surrounded by photographs of my ancestors, my late husband. Karim as a smiling child who didn't know greed yet. I'd arranged 3 chairs in the room. Mine was the high-backed one at the head. Theirs were lower, positioned so the afternoon light hit them full in the face. On the coffee table was a brown leather folder. I sat down, adjusted my black veil, let the silence stretch. Natalie fidgeted, kept crossing and uncrossing her legs. Her burgundy dress from the party was gone, replaced by conservative black, playing the grieving daughter. Karim couldn't stop his knee from bouncing, that nervous tic he'd had since childhood when he lied. I let them sweat for a full minute before speaking. I told them I'd made some important decisions about my estate, that things needed to change. I watched Karim's eyes light up. Just a flash, quick, but I caught it, relief mixed with greed. He started to speak, started saying something about how it was good I was thinking about my future, how they could help manage things. I told him to be quiet. Used a voice I hadn't used since he was a teenager who'd stolen $20 from my purse. He recoiled like I'd slapped him. I opened the folder, pulled out the first set of documents. These were legal papers bearing my attorney's notary seal. I explained what they were: an irrevocable trust, 90% of my estate going to the Children's Hope Foundation in Detroit, the organization that had helped me when I first arrived in America as a young widow with nothing. I watched the color drain from Natalie's face. The remaining 10%, I continued, would go into an educational trust for Layla, managed by an independent trustee. She'd get access when she turned 25. Karim and Natalie would receive only what Michigan law mandated for direct heirs, about $1,000 monthly, until my death. The silence was absolute. Just the grandfather clock in the corner, ticking away seconds. Natalie broke first, her voice shaking with barely controlled fury. She started to say this was ridiculous, that I couldn't do this. I cut her off, told her I could, and I had. Then I pulled out the second set of documents. These were different. Laboratory reports, security camera stills, text message transcripts. I explained what had happened at my party, how the poison in Helen's bloodstream was modified strychnine mixed with digoxin. Very specific, very rare, very difficult to obtain. I told them about the security cameras I'd had installed, how they'd captured everything. Natalie reaching into her clutch, pouring something into my gold-rimmed glass, the whole thing in crystal-clear high definition. Kareem started to tremble. Actually shake in his chair. I kept going. Told them about the text messages I'd recovered, the 9 months of planning, the contact with Dr. Pemberton, the backup poison from Derek Moss. I told them that Pemberton was already cooperating with the medical board, that in exchange for immunity, he'd confessed everything. How he'd sold them the poison, how he'd given them instructions, how he'd done this before with other families. That last part was a gamble. Pemberton hadn't confessed yet, but I was betting they wouldn't know that. Natalie stood up fast. Her chair fell backward with a crack. She accused me of setting them up, of switching the glasses, of trying to kill her mother. I stayed calm, asked her how she'd explain the fingerprints on the poison vial police found in her clutch. Another lie. We hadn't found the vial, but I needed her reaction. She went pale, actually green. Her lips trembled. She didn't deny the vial existed, just started stammering that she didn't know it was poison, that someone told her it was just a sedative. Something to make me sleep so they could talk to doctors about my mental health. Kareem shouted at her to shut up. Too late. That's when someone knocked on my door. I stood slowly, adjusted my black veil with deliberate care. I told them that must be the police detectives I'd called 20 minutes ago, that I'd given them time to arrive after we started this conversation. Kareem's face went from pale to gray. I opened the door. Detective Morrison came in with another detective and 3 uniformed officers. Morrison was someone I knew from community events. A good man. Fair. He greeted me formally, asked if these were the individuals we'd discussed. I confirmed. My son Kareem and his wife Natalie. What happened next was chaos. Natalie tried to run for the back door. 2 officers stopped her. She was screaming that I was lying, that this was a setup, that they couldn't do this. Kareem just collapsed into his chair, sobbing, big, wet, broken sobs. He begged me to forgive him, said he was desperate, that the loan sharks were going to kill them, that he had a family to protect. I moved closer, stood right in front of him. I told him he'd had a family, and he'd betrayed it in the worst possible way. That he hadn't just tried to kill me, but had endangered his own mother-in-law, an innocent woman who might have permanent damage. The officers put handcuffs on them, read them their rights. Natalie gave me one last look, pure hatred. She called me a self-righteous bitch, said I thought I was so holy with my headscarf and prayers, but I was just as manipulative as anyone. I stepped closer to her, close enough to smell her expensive perfume. I told her the difference was simple. I used my intelligence to protect what I loved, not destroy it. That she should never mistake faith for weakness. That those who pray most often are the ones who best understand the evil in the world. They took them away in handcuffs. Neighbors watched from windows. The scandal would be enormous. My name would be in newspapers. But I'd survived scandals before. When the house was finally empty, I took off my black veil, folded it carefully, put it away. I went to my bedroom, to my prayer rug, knelt facing Mecca, and finally, I cried. The trial lasted 3 months. Natalie's lawyer tried to claim I'd switched the glasses intentionally, that I'd tried to murder her mother, that I was the real criminal. But the evidence was overwhelming. The security footage showing Natalie pouring poison into my glass, the text messages planning my death, Dr. Pemberton's testimony about the 9-month conspiracy, Derek Moss from the pharmaceutical lab, who confessed to selling the poison in exchange for a reduced sentence. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Natalie got 18 years for attempted murder. Kareem accepted a plea deal in exchange for testifying against his wife and Pemberton. He got 10 years. Pemberton got 25 years. The investigation into his past revealed 4 other families he'd helped defraud through fake competency evaluations. I sat in the courtroom every day of the trial, wore my cream-colored hijab, the one from Damascus. I wanted them to see me, wanted them to know I'd survived. When they read the verdicts, Karim looked at me, mouthed the word, "sorry." I didn't respond, just gathered my purse and left. The money from my company was transferred to the Children's Hope Foundation. $31 million. They established a fund in my late husband's name. It now provides shelter, food, and education for 75 children. Every month I get letters from those kids, drawings, thank you notes, stories about their lives. Those letters heal something the trial couldn't touch. Helen recovered slowly. The memory problems persisted. She doesn't remember the party, doesn't remember that her own daughter tried to kill me and nearly killed her instead. I visit her every Tuesday, bring flowers from my garden, homemade baklava. We sit on her porch and watch the birds. I've never told her the complete truth. She thinks she had a stroke. That's kinder. And Layla, my granddaughter. Her parents signed temporary custody from prison, said they'd rather she stay with me than enter foster care. She lives with me now, has her own room painted yellow, her favorite color. Her drawings cover my refrigerator. Her laughter fills my house. I teach her to read, to cook, to pray. I teach her that the hijab I wear isn't a chain, it's a crown. Protection for a queen who never surrenders. We have a routine now. Every evening, we sit on my porch. Watch the sun set over Dearborn. The call to prayer echoes from the mosque down the street. Layla asks me questions about God, about why her parents aren't here, about why some people do bad things. I answer honestly. Tell her that sometimes the people we love make terrible choices, that money can poison hearts, that we have to be strong and smart and good, even when others aren't. She asked me last week if I was sad that Karim went to prison. I told her the truth, that I was sad for the little boy I raised, the one who used to help me in the garden, who drew me pictures on Mother's Day. That version of her father died a long time ago, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. But I wasn't sad that justice was served. She thought about that for a while, then asked if people could change back. I told her I didn't know, that I hoped so, that I prayed for it. That night, after Layla went to bed, I sat in my kitchen, made Turkish coffee in the copper pot, looked around at the life I'd built. At 68 years old, I'd been tested in ways I never imagined. My own son had tried to kill me, had been willing to erase me for money. But I was still here. I'd protected my life, my legacy, my truth. The hijab I wore every day wasn't just a symbol of faith anymore. It was armor, proof that strength comes in forms people don't expect, that the quiet ones are often the most dangerous, that underestimating someone because of how they look or what they believe is a fatal mistake. I thought about all of you who've listened to this story, followed along as I unraveled this nightmare. I want you to know something important. This isn't just my story. It's a warning and a lesson. The people closest to you can hurt you most. Money changes people. Debt drives desperation. And sometimes the hardest thing you'll ever do is protect yourself from your own family. But you can survive it. You can be smart and strategic and strong. You can use the very things that make others underestimate you as your greatest weapons. If you're out there, somewhere, listening to this, maybe you're facing your own betrayal. Maybe someone you trusted is trying to destroy you. Maybe you feel helpless and alone. I want you to know, you're not helpless. You're not alone. Document everything. Trust your instincts. Build your evidence carefully. And when the time comes, don't hesitate to protect yourself. Justice isn't always immediate. Sometimes it requires patience, planning, the courage to do hard things. But it comes. I'd love to hear from you. If this story resonated with you, if you faced something similar, Leave a comment telling me what city you're listening from. Let's build a community of survivors, people who refused to be victims. And if you want to hear more stories like this, about people who fought back, who survived, who won, subscribe to this channel, because there are more stories to tell, more lessons to share. The sun is setting over Dearborn now. Layla is calling me for dinner. We're making lamb biryani tonight, her favorite. I adjust my hijab, the cream-colored one with gold threads, my crown, my shield, my reminder that I am a survivor, and I'm not done living yet.